Joining me now is Moneeza Hashmi, a writer and a broadcaster, and of course the daughter of the well-renowned Pakistani poet Faiz Ahmad Faiz. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very honored and privileged.
Thank you. So February 2026 marks the 115th anniversary after the day your father was born. He is also deeply admired as our poet in this nation. Why do you think his poetry continues to resonate so much with his home country as well as Russians?
That's a very good question. Faiz was a writer of peace, promoter of peace, and his poetry promotes peace and talks about peace. Even though most of his poetry starts with a description of the worst times and the hard times and the difficult times, but there's always a message of hope on the last stanza of his poetry. So in this world today, there is peace, but there is no peace. You have peace for a few days or a few weeks, and then something starts happening. So I think that is the reason, one of the reasons why Faiz is still so popular, not only in Russia, but as you know, Russia has its own situations, but in the world. And his messages of peace, tolerance, human dignity, human rights are so popular and accepted everywhere.
So your book was written as this way to maintain this dialogue with your father after decades of his passing. What questions do you wish you could have asked him during his lifetime? And why did you decide to turn this conversation into your book?
My dad, and we always say that, may he rest in peace, was a man who was very busy. Jail. He was in jail several times. He was in exile several times. He was a busy man because at that time he was a journalist. And being a journalist at that time meant that you had to stay awake at night because the newspaper had to come out in the morning. So he would sleep during the day and be awake during the night, which was totally opposite to the way we lived. And then he had so many meetings and so many people coming to see him from the Labour Party, from the trade unions, from the workers. So as a young girl growing up, I really did not have that much access to him, to talk to him, because my mother would say, "Go away." And then I would get up in the morning and say, where's Dad? And she would be crying because he would have been taken to jail or something like that. So there were gaps in my life, huge gaps in my life, where I felt that I couldn't converse with him. I couldn't dialogue and talk to him as fathers do with daughters. So then during COVID, I found time, as we all did, with nothing to do. So I asked my son, I said, I think I have some letters from, we call him Abba, and I would like to print them. So he thought about it and said, that's boring. I said, what do you mean? He said, you know, people do that and do that. Why don't you write to him and all the things that have happened to you since he passed away? Tell him how your life has passed and share a dialogue with him. And that's why the book is called Conversations with My Father. So he writes to me. So I have printed his letters and I've responded to those letters today, after 40 years. So I don't want to say that, but people who have read it have said that it's a lovely book. And daughters have come to me and cried and said, we feel that we are talking to your father and talking to our fathers. So it's a conversation with my father that I never had when he was around. So I'm having a conversation with him now through my book and telling him all about my life. So that's why it's written 40 years afterwards. I wonder if it made sense.
I want to sort of touch on your father's legacy. He was a renowned Marxist. He even received the Lenin Peace Prize. What aspects of his poetry do you think resonated so much with the Soviet people at that time?
Yes, it was the Soviet Union. My father had political turmoils troubling him throughout his life, like I just said. He was a Marxist, and Marxism was not very accepted in Pakistan. We're talking about the 50s and the 60s. And every time a government changed, the first thing that happened was that the Marxists were put in jail. So he was coming and going, and all that trauma was going on. So he, being a man of peace, and his poetry is so beautiful, if you could understand it, and so beautifully elaborates how important it is for peace. So I think that turmoil and that being in a difficult position and constantly being harassed, in a manner of speaking, he felt that he could identify with the world and with the thoughts that were happening here in the Soviet Union of the Marxists, equality, human rights, human peace, and especially after the war. So there was a building up of the Soviet Union and so on and so forth. So he identified very much with that. And that's why his poetry became very popular, translated, of course, very, very popular here with the people. And that's how, of course, he was promoted to become the Lenin Peace Prize winner, which was something. Can I describe that?
Of course, yes, absolutely.
I was 16, 1962. He had just come out of a heart attack. He was just recovering from a heart attack. And I can see him lying outside, in a patio we had. And we had those black phone calls, the phones that you used to pick up and call. And it rang. And he picked it up. He was lying down, and I was standing there. And he said, "What? What?" And my mother was standing there, and she said, "Faiz, what is it?" So he said, I can't tell you. And she remember her saying that. And she said, "Is it the Nobel Prize?" He said, "No, bigger than that. It's the Lenin Peace Prize." I was standing right there. And his face changed. And elation on his face, the delight and the feeling, like if you tell me I've become the beauty queen, I would sort of say, "What?" And I remember that. His face changed. And then, of course, the whole detail of going to Russia to accept it. He got permission it was a martial law, it was a military dictatorship. He got permission for them to come to Moscow to receive it. My sister accompanied him. I was too young, I was in school. But when he received it, it was a big affair. He was informed, "Don't come back." So he went into exile, and he sent for my mother and myself also, and we went to London, and we were there for 2 years. But Faiz could not stay away from Pakistan. That was his life, his connection, his roots, his soul. He had to come back. So then we came back, and then it's another story. So the connection that he had with obviously the people who read him, and obviously he was also a very important member of the Afro-Asian Writers Union. He was one of the biggest members of that as well. So that's the connection he had and the legacy he has here. And I think even today, people read about him, people read his poetry. And I presume, but translation is not the beauty. The beauty is the natural language. But of course, it's been translated very beautifully, I'm informed.
Exactly, that's what I was going to ask you about in my next question, because we know that in 2022, your father's works were published and translated in Russia.
Yes.
So it's curious, because why do you think they've done this now? And it kind of goes to show that his legacy lives on to this day.
Yes. The world, as I just said earlier, is unfortunately, and will continue perhaps to be, in turmoil. So whether it's an intellectual, whether it's an artist, whether it's a poet, whether it's a singer or who talks about peace and wants to say that there should be peace in the world and have hope for peace, is popular. And so Faiz continues to be popular, not only in Pakistan but across the world. People who understand Urdu, which is our language, of course, they understand that. But his words just literally ring as if they were written yesterday. And people used to ask them, Faiz Saab, we call them Saab, Mr. Faiz, why is it that your poetry feels as if it was written just like yesterday? He said, well, I wrote it, 20, 30 years ago. You haven't changed the times. It's not my fault. That's why, so even today, some of his poetry, not some, most of his poetry, sounds as if it has been written today. Because it's all about wake up, stand on your feet, speak. You have the right to speak. And of course, there are poems like that, and then there are poems which are so beautiful, so gentle, so romantic. And everybody thinks that that romance is with a female. No, that romance is with his country. It's the country, not the state, the country, the people, the women, the children that he talks about. And yet then when he writes about Palestine, he writes about Africa.
Latin America.
Yes, South Africa, when there was apartheid there, he was writing there, and they were reciting his poetry when they were demonstrating. They told me that when I went to South Africa. He writes about minorities. He writes about whenever there was. So these things used to affect him. And so even today, they sound as if they are absolutely written today. Because unfortunately, the world continues. Uneven, uncertain, and in trouble.
I also wanted to ask you about his time in Moscow. There's this peculiar story where he was walking across a Moscow embankment and a couple apparently recognized him and gifted him flowers. How did he describe that moment, and did he generally speak of ordinary Soviet citizens?
Yes, I mean, again, I mean, that particular instance has been recited to me or told me by a friend of his, Dr. Ludmila. So that's how I know about it. But he loved people. I mean, he loved the Uzbeki people because he used to say they're my size, because he was a short size. Anyway. But he just generally, for him, whether it was Africa or he went to Cuba, and so he very well connected. He met Fidel Castro and so on. He connected with the people there, with all the people who were suffering in their own manner and time and whatever was going on in that country. But because he used to come here very often, he's written a book which is called, it was about his travelogue. And he traveled across the Soviet Union at that time. And I read that book. And being as crazy as I am, I followed his footsteps when he passed away. This is the year 1986-87. And the Afro-Asian writers took me across the country. And I was meeting his friends and meeting his people and so on, all the people who knew him. It was beautiful. So he was gone. And then, of course, the writers who were his friends, Rasul Gazmatov, Changiz Hatmatov, and Mariam Sulganik, all these wonderful people who were his friends, Nazim Hikmat, that he was very, very friendly with. So he kept coming. First of all, he kept coming here because during his exile years, and he was welcomed here. It was not that you've gone for a visit or a tour. He was coming home. You know, to him, Moscow was his second home. Although, mind you, he didn't know the language. But of course, he had people here who would translate for him. So for him, this was like his second home. And every time, sometimes when I would go in the morning and say to my mother, "Where's Abba?" "Oh, he's gone." "Moscow?" Because the first option would be Moscow. So she's whatever, you know. And this was his first stop before he traveled elsewhere also. So in a manner of speaking, he was very warmly connected with the people, with the atmosphere, with the writers, with the poets, with the Writers' Union, and felt familiar and comfortable. So that was his connection, and obviously that is still around. I think so. The fact that I'm sitting here in front of you means that there is that connection with Faiz. Other than the Lenin Peace Prize, of course, that of course is a huge, huge honor and privilege for us, the family, as well.
Considering he travelled so often to Moscow, what do you think impressed him the most about the Russian capital?
He would say, from what my mother used to tell us and my sister, he would just say the warmth, the feeling of being, there was no them and us, there was all us. So he was connected. It was a feeling of equality. It was a feeling of being with family. Obviously, I mean, then he would, and he would love walking, apparently, I'm told, on the embankment and this and that. He was not a sort of exercise mania, but he would, instead of staying in a hotel, he'd like to just go and walk and feel and of course, the atmosphere, the feeling of being welcomed, and the feeling of having people coming to see you and talking about issues and themes that were related to your heart, which could be war, which could be peace, which could be how can we promote peace. And he loved, of course, culture, music, everything. So that was here. You would find that here. So that also made him feel very comfortable. And I presume he liked your food as well. I've never really spoken about that. But I think he used to just feel that he had friends here. And the friends welcomed him, hugely. Of course, because they couldn't come to Pakistan. Because there was that kind of a friction at that time. And we had military governments and so on and so forth, coming and going, coming and going. So his coming here was easier. And there were meetings here for the Afro-Asians and so on and so forth. And of course, there were times when he would be unfortunately not well. So he went to Sochi, he met Pablo Neruda there, and that was, his doctors were there, and there were doctors here also, so his medical examinations were also done here, and he was treated here as well. So that's also probably a connection. But otherwise, he just, Moscow.
And your father's time in Moscow is also often cited as this pivotal moment in shaping his poetry, his writing. In what specific ways do you think this period, the Soviet era, has shaped and transformed his literature?
When I asked my sister about this question, and she told me, she said it was a question of him traveling to a place where he was mentally at peace. And if you know, and I know, whoever, when you're writing, then the muse has to come to you. Your creativity has to wake up. And your words have to flow. And a thought has to come, which can only happen when you're at peace and when you are physically okay, nothing worrying about. So he would be here alone because obviously we were not here, and my mother was obviously not here, and so he was left alone. So I think that is what used to help him become the imaginative poet. And I was informed yesterday by another friend of his, and he was very clever about writing poetry, and then he would write the date and the place. And the number of poems that say Moscow, Moscow, Moscow. And I suddenly thought, yes, you're right. So which obviously show that he was here and the poetry was reaching him. Even if you happen to be in a place which is not connected to your thought, for example, what's happening in Pakistan or what's happening in Africa or something, but if it comes suddenly, and your imagination and your creativity, we call it Ahmad, which means the coming. So if the coming begins, then you start writing. And this friend of hers, Dr. Ludmila, told me yesterday, he said he used to write his poems and then give them to me and say, keep them. And then come back 6 months later and she would give them back to him. Oh, okay. And then start correcting them. So he wrote so much here, which was again, as I said, probably the atmosphere, the calmness, the serenity, the feeling of being at peace. And the words and the themes and the images. His poetry is a poetry that they say, I mean, even I can feel it. You can actually see it. And it has so much music in it as well. The lyrics are musical. And if you know, in Pakistan and in India, of course in Pakistan, it's sung by the top artists and singers of Pakistan. So it has so much lyricism in it. It has so much music in it as well. So this is not usual. This is very exceptional. Very exceptional. And because he was so professional in 4 languages, Arabic, Persian, English, Urdu, and Punjabi, which is our provincial language. So his metaphors that he uses, and the similes that he uses, and the historical images that come up are very mixed. And you have to actually understand them very... he's a complicated poet, because you feel that he's complicated, because his imagery and his verses are so interconnected with history, with religion, with the languages, linguistics. It's just amazing.
I want to return to your book.
Yes.
We know your sister, Salima, she's
Yes.
also written another book
Yes.
about your father. In what ways do you think your perspectives differ?
Okay. Her book, that was launched this year, in March, she's taken about 5 years to write it, is not only about her father. It's a memoir from the age of 4 to the present. There is, of course, a very major segment in it about our father, but in it is her life, how she meets her husband, how they fall in love, how they get married, how she goes to England to study, what she studies, what life goes on there, how she then teaches and is one of the most primary art institutions in Pakistan. She's one of the top artists of Pakistan, National College of Arts, and becomes the principal, and her friends there, and then and so on and so forth. So it's all about her. It's her memoirs, and the people she meets, the friends she meets, and then, of course, unfortunately, very unfortunately, her husband had a stroke, and he was on bed, not moving, literally not moving, for 14 years.
I'm sorry.
Yes, now passed away 3 years ago. So that trauma of her life, how that she dealt with it, because it's very difficult, and she slept with him every night in the same bed. And I think the world thought that that was the most beautiful couple, that they stayed together even though they're not together, if you know. Because there was a time in the beginning when he could understand, couldn't speak. And then, of course, slowly it all went away, and then he passed away. So this is her book. It's all about her life. In that kind of memoirs, my book is a dialogue with my dad, as I've explained. So there's a difference that way. I haven't put in everything. I've just put in small instances that I thought he'd like to know about. My life in Pakistan television. I spent 40 years in television, Pakistan television. My visit to Jerusalem and to the Aqsa mosque. I thought he'd be interested to know about that. Then my becoming a grandmother, because he was a grandfather. These are the kind of dialogues that I have in my book. And of course, there are his letters to me, talking to me about Beirut. He was there during the first war, all of that. Oh yes, it was a very dangerous time. And then talking to me, and that's one of the most beautiful things that I have now taken to heart. Because those were the days, and I wrote to him and said, things are so stressful here, and this and this and this. And he wrote to me and he said, learn to switch off. And then he explains how he has learned to switch off. And I can understand that, how he used to switch off and leave the world behind, which was a dangerous world or a troubled world or a distressful world, and go into another world of peace, of quiet, tranquility, serenity. And you know, ever since that, a lot of people have told me that they've started switching off. And there were lots of people who used to say that they would come to a big function, a big party, and they will see him sitting in a corner, smoking away, physically there, but mentally not. And I have a feeling he had switched off. Sometimes you have to go to places and be with people and try to make conversation, and you feel uncomfortable. So you switch off, you just keep smiling. And you're thinking of something quite different. So these are the things that this book is also sharing with and the most important thing is, there are only two people in this world who know Faiz as a father, my sister and myself. So I thought it was time for somebody now to tell the world what was he like as a father. They know him as a journalist, they know him as a poet, they know him as an activist, they know him as an educationist, they know him as a philosopher, everything. But what was the father all about? So in this, I'm also talking to him as a father, which I think a lot of people have said was they didn't know about. And he's been talking to me and telling me, oh, so, I was in a hostel. 4 years I was in a hostel. And I must have written to him saying, it's very hot, and I don't have any money. So he said, I'll give you the money, don't worry about it. Go and buy yourself a fan, go do this. Like all fathers do, like simple, connect with their daughters. And a lot of people tell me that, and I hope my sister doesn't mind, that I was his favorite. No, I don't want to say that. But a lot of people say that he would, because he would talk about you all the time, because I'm the tap, and my sister's very quiet. And she's more like him.
Really?
Yes, she's more like him in the way she's an artist and everything else. And I'm more the jumpy type. I jump all over the place.
My final question is, I'd like to ask you, what would be the most important message from your father's life, not just his poetry, his literature and his activism? What would you like to convey to readers from all around the world?
Read his poetry and get the message that he talks about of peace, of hope, of human dignity, of human rights, women's rights, children's rights, and pass it on and work on it. First believe in it, and after believing in it, make sure that your way of life and the way you act, the way you think, is focused on that. And that is something that we have formed a foundation in his name in Pakistan. It's called the Faiz Foundation. And we hold a festival in his name every year in February. We've just held the 10th this year. It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And we are trying to promote his message of peace and promotion of art and culture and promotion of peace through art and culture. And we talk about politics. And we have sessions on literature. And we have sessions on art. And we have dances. And we have music. And we have children dancing. It's now become a huge cultural festival of Pakistan, the Faiz Festival. So that's what and we say to ourselves when we finish, if one person has gone home saying, oh, yes, now I need to change my life. Now I need to change my thoughts. Now I need to become active in peace. We have been successful. And believe you me, Faiz, after this is going to be the 42nd year of his death. He died in 1984. His popularity seems to be not only stable, I would say, increasing. We feel that because of the royalty that we receive from his books, the sale of his books. And he's becoming so popular because his poetry is being used in films internationally. They get permission from us. From all over the world, singers, artists come to us, ask us permission, and we have to give it to them, of course. So we know how he is becoming popular across the world. Because the world, unfortunately, as we all know, is a difficult place to live. And there are themes of turmoil, racism, dominance, even some madness. So his words give you the strength and give you the motto to become someone or an advocate to promote tolerance, peace, human rights. So that's the message I think I'd like to give the world. Read Faiz, believe in him, and follow what he has to say.
Moneeza Hashmi, thank you so much for your time, for joining us, and for sharing all of your reflections.
Thank you.